Technology can identify a pattern. It can surface a risk, flag a trend, and show us where attention is needed. But what it can't do is walk onto the floor. It doesn't notice when someone hesitates before answering a question. It can't earn the trust that makes a worker comfortable enough to say, this is how the job really gets done. And it certainly cannot turn a safety requirement into something people genuinely believe belongs to them. My guest today has spent almost 4 decades working at the intersection of safety, leadership, and human behavior. And after building a career inside some of the world's largest organizations and now helping organizations use safety technology, he's written a book about the part technology cannot do for us. What happens after the data tells us where to look? Who starts that conversation? And how do we turn the idea of safety partnership into something leaders and frontline workers actually practice every day? Welcome back to the Safety Brief. I'm your host, Monika, and today's guest is none other than my virtual co-host and now two-time author, Scott Gaddis. Scott has spent nearly 4 decades in occupational health and safety with leadership experience at General Electric, Kimberly-Clark, Bristol-Myers, and Coveris. Today, he leads the health and safety practice at Intellex and has spoken at just about every major conference in his profession. Now, with the release of his second book, From Partnership to Practice, 52 weeks of 5-minute lessons for safety leadership at every level, he can officially add two-time author to that already very, very long list of accomplishments. The book contains 260 lessons designed to be used over the course of a year with practical actions for both leaders and frontline workers. Scott, congratulations and welcome to your own podcast as the guest. How does it feel being on this side of the conversation?
It's I've done both, of course, right? Even on this podcast, sometimes I'm the host, sometimes I'm the subject matter expert on whatever we're talking about. This one maybe hits a little closer to home because it's something that I've been working on for quite a while.
Wow, that's so exciting. I'm happy to have you. Let's start with a bunch of the questions. So,
Okay.
you work at a safety technology company. You spend a significant amount of your time helping organizations understand how data, systems, and technology can improve safety performance. And then you wrote a book about it, but it's not really about technology at all. What's it actually about?
No. Yeah, I would say that, first, I would kind of clear that up as technology and people are not competing priorities. I think the very best organizations understand that technology enables better leadership, but it doesn't replace leadership. And that maybe is the genesis of the book because I do spend every day helping organizations leverage technology to improve safety, our environment, our health. But my mandate when I joined Intellex, believe it or not, was to act like like an EHS practitioner. And that may sound somewhat out of right field. Is that I wasn't hired to be a technology professional. I was hired to be an EHS practitioner, and often I'm the one that many in our organization call or they ask me, how should we think about this challenge as a practitioner? So I'm that person. I'm the conversationalist. So when our teams go away, they can fill that gap with product. They may leverage a sales action, or they may, deliver better customer support by having that knowledge of a practitioner. And the more that I do work with technology, the more convinced that I am that leadership is still the differentiator between going from good to great. And to maybe explain that to you, Monica, is that two companies, and I see this even with some of our own clients, two companies can implement the very same software and achieve entirely different results because one have they have leaders that engage people and the other simply want to manage data within their company. So technology, I absolutely believe it gives us visibility, but leadership gives us influence, and that really is the genesis of my book. That's what I wanted to reinforce uh, in the pages of that book. I've just seen firsthand how powerful technology can be, but I've also seen how technology reaches its full potential only when leaders use it to have better conversations with the people actually doing the work. So that was the reason that I wrote the book. And kind of funny is that I write very late at night. So I usually try to go to bed around 10:30 in the evening, and I'll sit in bed, and which absolutely drives others in the house crazy. But I'll write, I'll just start writing something that I think is quite important, and then it turns into chapters, and then of course it turned into a book, or my second book. So yeah.
There's a line that's connected to the book that kind of stuck with me. It said, "The algorithm can't walk the floor." What did you
Mhm.
mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's real simple. Is technology identifies where your attention is needed. Leaders, I believe, discover the why. So AI, and we're seeing it within our own company. We have a tremendous amount of interest from our clients, and including AI in some of their decision making, avenues that they want to make as practitioner. But I find it best that AI can recognize trends faster than any human can. I've actually been using it within intellects, and it's catching things that I would not have caught, or I would have spent a tremendous amount of my time trying to figure those things out. So dashboards, things like that, they certainly can, reveal patterns. Analytics really kind of point us to the risk. And I say this. I mean, I spoke at ASSP in Anaheim, what, a month ago, and I probably had 700 people in that room, and they were all very, very interested, right, in the benefits of AI. I even told that group of people is that analytics can point us to the risk, but when I say that, I want it to be a litmus test, right? I still want that practitioner in their chair, hopefully deciding between those two or three things, or those three or four things that AI can really do for us. None of those tools that I could talk about, what Intellects has, what anybody has, can understand context, though. So workers provide context, leaders uncover context. And, so I'll give you an example. A dashboard might show an increase in hand injuries. Walking the floor will probably reveal that a production schedule got really tight, or it got changed, or your overtime doubled, or we had an experienced employee training a new hire employee. Everybody started to feel rushed. So that's the story, or an example of a story that a dashboard simply cannot tell. And that really is the genesis behind some of my writing, is that data, I think, is very clever in how it can begin a conversation, but leadership actually completes that conversation.
Yeah, we've talked about many times on this podcast how AI and technology is very helpful, but it could also be harmful. And I imagine that the danger is not that the technology itself, it's believing that once we have collected that data, issued the report, or displayed the dashboard, that once the leadership work is finished, is that kind of where you see organizations getting stuck?
I do. I mean, I think there's, and we all come to this, especially in the field that I've chosen to have a career in, which is safety and health and environmental programming, is that I understand very, very quickly that the better I was at the front line of my organization with the people that were actually making something or providing the service, the better I was able to connect with them, the better my programs were, the better my process was in regard to its robustness. So I think technology really excels at some of the things I mentioned, of collecting information, identifying those trends. Is there repetitive work that we can build efficiencies from? Can I predict future risk? And certainly we've showed that through AI. I like tools, like AI, that help me standardize a process. I just like connecting information across an organization locally or on an enterprise level. But I think my dividing line is that at the end of the day, regardless of all of that stuff that we have flowing in now because of AI, or even technology, you still have to build trust within
Mhm.
the organization. You still have to be able to coach people who are in the workforce. And many times I talk a lot about this, is that I need to see the whites of the eyes, right, of the people that are working in my organization, because there is no technology that can tell me that a person on the front line maybe going through a financial hardship or maybe going through a relationship issue. Those are really things that are key on me trying to understand. So I need to be able to read emotion. AI can't do that very well. Understanding the context of what I find at the front line. And then all of that really helps me when I lead effectively is I can solve the ambiguity that I see in the workforce, and that inspires ownership across the board. So
Mhm.
I think that when I look, and especially, I get this question quite a lot, even when I talk now. Many of the things that I present at the conference have nothing to do with technology, and it's really because of this: is that the future for me isn't deciding whether technology or people are more important. I think we've proved both. I would say that every time that I mention technology, the rooms are going to fill up, and they're very, very curious about that. The point that I always make, though, is I don't want you to forget about the people that are in that organization. So it's understanding which work belongs to each, and then I would say don't expect technology to do human work. That's not where we're at yet, at least.
No, that's fair. One question I did have though is what can workers tell immediately about a leader who's genuinely there to listen and care versus one who's just there to inspect or perform like a leadership ritual?
Yeah, well, it's pretty easy. I write about a lot about this. I mean, you mentioned that I wrote 260 lessons, and it's true. I did, and there are thousands of lessons, but most of them is exactly what you just mentioned. Is that presence is far more important than proximity, and I've often said is that a person, especially on the front line, the ones that actually make something or the ones that are providing a service, uh, they are tremendously good at judging authenticity. Right, so walking the floor, it's really not about inspecting things. Sometimes it is, of course, finding violations, catching them in some type of mistake. What I usually try to say, check those boxes. And I spent, really my formative years very, very early in my career doing just that because I was just trying to achieve compliance, to stay into compliance, and those are the things that were what I thought were required to me. The decision point, really in my mind started happening when I changed my perspective totally. Is that I went to the floor to learn. I went to see if a procedure that they were performing matched what I wrote for them to do. And many times it wasn't right. We talk about this quite often. Uh, Work as written or work as actually done, and many times those two things aren't the same. So learning what's happening, why are they now following things that I've asked them to do? There's usually a really good reason for it, and it requires me asking questions of them about why things are occurring the way that I see them. It's just observing what's the actual floor look like. And it makes no difference if you're in manufacturing or in construction. Observation is a really, really big tool that helps me develop program for the organizations I've been asked to lead. The big thing I believe is listening. Is that we just need to listen better. And when I say listen, I don't mean listen to answer. I spent an entire section of that book. We listen to answer, right? We want to give this answer back, but we shouldn't listen that. We should be very active listeners, right? We should be listening to see what perspective is coming out of the mouth of that person that you're actually talking to. And that allows us to have conversation.
Mhm.
And once we have conversation, we can build relationships. I'll kind of give you a really kind of funny story about that. Is again, kind of earlier in my career when I was just at a site level, I was notorious for going into a machine room or on an operating floor, and I would ask, I would try to create these relationships, and we had some of our men and women that were working there. They had piano recitals at 6 o'clock at night, or they had a little league ball game, and I would show up. I would just show up. I would show up at a little league ball game or a piano recital, and those employees were just absolutely astounded that I would do something like that that would really kind of pull me away from what I could be doing but it allowed me to invest in them. And they saw that. And what I was trying to do was to build relationships with them because I wanted them to trust me and I wanted them to have a relationship with me. And you have to really kind of step outside of yourself, especially you've got to step outside of just compliance. So, practical questions, and this is for our audience, right? Tell me about today's work, right? That's an open question to really you want to understand what they're going through. What's different today than it was yesterday? What's making your work harder? And if you could change one thing, I mean, these are my four questions I use quite often. If you could change one thing without authority, what would it be? That changes the entire bank of answers that you'll receive. So don't go to the floor looking for problems, go looking for understanding. And understanding comes from those things, right? Learning and asking and observing and building a relationship with the people that you care about.
Wow, that's great. I've often heard the quote that people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad leadership. So that's great to know that there's people like you out there that are actually sitting down and building that report. Did you find that it had a positive influence on the output from the employees?
Well, it does. I go back to what we talked about, right? Authenticity really matters. People are wonderfully clever at understanding how real you are, especially
Mhm.
if you're, quote, a leader. And I do think that those, especially in safety and health, I have found us, I'll put me in that category, are those that are very compliant minded, right? We want to get a side or organization in compliance, and then there's many others, that said there's more to it than just compliance, and we tend to go towards soft skills, and to me those are the harder ones. Is that if they see you as this person that they perceive really cares about them, then they're going to take the chance with you. They're going to lean into you, and they're going to build this relationship where they trust you. And you don't have to have these negotiations or all these mediations with the workforce once they trust you. Because I've never led anything where I didn't try to lead it like I would my own immediate family. Is that I cared about them a lot. I can remember that I was leading, a big organization, pharmaceutical company, and the president of the company asked me to stand up and say a few words, and I did. I mean, not thinking too much about it. I said, I love my job, and I love you enough that I want to get you home every single day, safe and healthy. And I said that, we had the meeting and we turned around. I'm walking back to the office with him. And he said, Did you just tell 600 people that you loved them? I said, I think love is an action, right? You really do have to
Mhm.
love what you're doing, but you have to love these people enough to keep them safe. And I've always led that way, and that really does require me to really get very personal with the folks that are in my organization. And I don't think we talk about love like you would for a spouse, but you really do have to care for the people in your organization. And if that happens, you can lead them very, very effectively.
No, I agree with that entirely. And I think that's the bridge between your first book and this one. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the first book really made the case for partnership. It challenged
Yeah.
organizations to stop treating workers as passive participants in safety and instead build that genuine partnership with the front line. So, was that the response? Was it the response to this book that convinced you the second one was necessary?
Yeah, I think when I look back at it, I was gosh, I've been writing for a long time, but never 300 pages of anything. And when I was writing
Mhm.
my first book, it was a reflection of me looking at my work, how I worked, how I had success. There's certainly some how in that book, and I was really focused on it for maybe the younger practitioner. But then I quickly found out that plant managers were reading my book, operations managers were reading my book. But overall, I would say the first book explained why these things are important, why
Mhm.
this should come before that, and then and it was not pushback, but it was feedback from those that read the book. They absolutely got what I was saying, right? They received the message, they were excited about the message, But one thing kept coming back is how do we do that stuff, right?
Mhm.
And so this one really kind of explains the how. And I've always been a big advocate. I keep a devotional, a spiritual devotion, on my desk, and every morning I'll come and I'll read a devotion, and it kind of sets me for the day ahead. It gives me, a couple things to think about, and I can meditate on that, right, just a little bit, and get on
Mhm.
into my work. And I thought, right, how clever it would be if there was something like that for safety and health professionals. And then I thought broader than that, is that could it be just for those that care about safety? And
Mhm.
so I received the message, I believe everything you've written. Now tell me what to do tomorrow. It's how I've kind of talked about that. So so this book, my new book became that. It was a daily habit book. It was
Mhm.
how to have a daily conversation. It gave you very practical leadership ideas. And then I think for me, I've always been somebody that was into nudge strategy. And nudge strategy is doing very small things over and over again, and they compound, right? So if you do these things over and over again, if you make them disciplines, then they compound, and you'll see those accumulations really accrue into something very, very positive. And so I think vision inspires people, and that was the first book. I think practice kind of transforms all of that through very simple actions. And everyone that listens to this podcast, many of them will probably be EHS professionals, and they do know that this is very, very complete work that we do, because we have to be an engineer, we have to be part HR, we have to be a minister. There's so many facets of being a great EHS professional. But we get to where we are. If we do get to that level, it's practice. We just do things
Mhm.
over and over again, and we transform, an organization that way.
So it sounds like you've taken real world examples and firsthand experience and turned it into practical advice, if you will, that people can implement in their day to day. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, in your experience, did people agree with the philosophies in your teachings, or did they struggle with what to do next? How did it resonate?
Yeah. So yeah, I would say overall, the ones that read my first book, they did take it more of a philosophy, which kind of surprised me, because I didn't write it thinking that. Uh, but it really is how a lot of practitioners struggle
Mhm.
leading program, is that uh, they they get the whole idea of vision, they create these strategies, right, and they're very lofty ideas that they have, and they talk to people, they benchmark, but what they struggle with is
Mhm.
implementation. And
Mhm.
so, when I think about this book, it's not the fact that most leaders, they don't resist partnership. That's
Mhm.
what I would say first. They simply don't know how to create it on a very consistent basis. So there's these stops and starts, these hills and these valleys that they fall into, and they don't see the results right away that they would like to see, so they stop and they look for something else. And it really is because they've taken this big huge strategy that's in front of them, and they really don't know how to execute it. So questions, that they were asking me is, how do I start, right? Who do I ask? Who do I go and take these great things that you've talked about to? What if nobody talks to me, right? Which many times the front line won't talk to you, or the C-suite won't talk to you. What if somebody disagrees, right? How do I respond to all that? So when I look at the book that I wrote, the first thing I had to kind of figure out is that which of all of these things that I know, over the
Mhm.
last 40 years are worth talking about, and can you kind of size them up in 52 weekly themes and
Mhm.
260 lessons? So this book, what I really try to do was to give leaders very practical answers
Mhm.
on those everyday situations. And I really don't think that leadership failure is a failure of intention. I don't think any of us intend to fail. I think
Mhm.
failure comes through execution of really not knowing what that next step is. And many times I just think that we never are really great at moving from strategy to objective setting that are small enough steps that get us to where we want to. And I would also say I'm making a very blanket statement. I recognize that because some of us are very, very good at doing those things. But I wrote the book for those maybe
Mhm.
that do struggle a bit.
Is that why you structured it in that 5 minute, 52 week of lessons format?
I did. Yeah, but I think well, a couple of things, right? I talked about that devotion book
Mhm.
because I don't have time to read big books of really anything. I try to, but I'll read a book and I'll put it on a shelf and I won't think about it ever again. And what I wanted to do was to try to compose a book, to write a book where
Mhm.
you could revisit it over and over again, or there may be this one week, right, within those 52 that really struck a chord with you. But the big thing, I guess, if I were to have an idea about it, I think
Mhm.
leadership does grow through repetition. And I think it's not information overload. And every book that I've read on leadership, it's 300 or 400 page book. You take it chapter by chapter. By chapter
Mhm.
27, you forgot what chapter 13 said. So I did. I wanted it to be in very small steps. I even wrote it where nobody, even reads anything over the weekend. These are 5 day lessons. So you
Mhm.
start on Monday, you end up on Friday. You spend maybe a little bit more time on Friday because I summarize things.
Mhm.
And people change because they start to think differently every day. So 5 minutes before the shift, 5 minutes during a team meeting, 5 minutes after an
Mhm.
incident. That is really what I think really goes after culture and starts shaping it a little bit differently, a little bit at a time. And I wanted to really write something that was part of someone's routine. I didn't think that the average practitioner, and Monica, you know this, man, we work in marketing, trying to figure out what the sweet spot is, even from material that we're trying to get a practitioner to read. And we don't have a lot of time, right? So we do have to say things very succinctly, short many times. But I just didn't want it to be a book that was sitting on a shelf. And so leadership, I don't think it does happen in one breakthrough moment. I think it's really just kind of built with hundreds of these ordinary conversations that we would like to have, but we don't.
I mean,
That's a lot to
200
say,
and
but I think that is the truth.
right, right. I was gonna say, 260 lessons is super impressive. And after nearly 4 decades of experience, was narrowing down your experience into just 260 lessons difficult, or did it kind of come quickly to you?
Well, I don't know if it came quickly. In some ways, yes. I mean, I think I could have talked about 500 different lessons,
Hmm.
but it was easier for me to think about it in themes,
Hmm.
and it was easy for me to think about it in parts. So really, what I intended to do when I started writing the book was to write it thinking about this young practitioner that
Hmm.
had entered the workforce. Many of the things, and I sit on several, college boards that, give direction or at least advice on what occupational health and safety programs should look like. And I remember when I came out of college, I had a compliance minded focus about what my work was. It
Hmm.
was within 2 or 3 months that I figured out there's a lot more soft sides of this that I don't have. I put a bishop on the front of this book because a bishop on a chessboard, it moves diagonally. It
Hmm.
moves very informally through an organization. And in as many ways, how an EHS practitioner moves in their organization, we never start with all of the authority that we would like to have. We are always negotiating, we're always mediating things,
Hmm.
we are always trying to get to a decision. that we can't make alone. So how do we build influence? We are always talking with a supervisor that may
Mhm.
have, control over an area that we think that needs to change. So that bishop, right, where all of these informal diagonal moves within an organization, so really started there is that, the first part of the book is about understanding who you are as a safety and health practitioner, and then the second section is how do you really do that work, and then the third section is how do you extend that work past yourself, and then the fourth, which I didn't expect to write but I thought it was important, is what is your legacy in safety and
Mm.
health. And I recognize that this could be, a 25 or a 30-year-old person that would be reading the book, looking at this being a couple of decades away before they even need to consider it. But how you start many times is how you're going to finish. And that is really has been my mantra, is that I've always wanted to quickly get to where my ground is, right? What's my North Star in leading safety and health in an organization? And the rest of it has just been those accumulations of small things that I was able to do. So that's really how I thought about it, kind of those four big parts. And then I just started dividing those, what within that section, what's important for you to know. So yeah, I probably started with 300 different things. I was telling someone, just the other day that they've started reading my book and they had noticed that. And, they said, I don't know if this section is going to be, what I need. I said, I think that's okay.
Mhm.
I think there's going to be weeks that you'll find, five lessons that you've passed or you've validated or you don't. I think that's another reason why you read a book.
Well, having said that, was there a lesson that was particularly difficult to write just because you might have handled it differently earlier in your career?
Yeah, well, it actually is, in that last section of the book. I spend a week talking to safety and health practitioners really about the weight of what we do. I think there is a significant amount of weight to leading safety and health in an organization because it's different than if you're simply an engineer, or it's different if you're in finance, or it's different, right, if you have in HR. We carry the weight of an organization many times on our shoulders. So I think every safety and health practitioner that really is striving to do the role that they know is their calling, it's that kind of stuff. It's the missing, dinner at night. It's missing the little league ball games because you're still at work.
Mhm.
There's really a tremendous amount of weight, especially in this field, because there's so many emotional ties that we have to the workforces that we're asked to protect. So that's probably the harder section, that I wrote. But I'm going to think when a practitioner reads that section, they're going to identify with it immediately.
You also managed to have Malcolm Staves, the Global Vice President of Health and Safety at L'Oreal, write the foreword. How'd you manage to pull that off?
Well, I've always admired Malcolm. Malcolm Staves. He is the vice president now, environment, health, and safety. He's been at L'Oreal for a long, long time. But especially when I go to Europe, he's many times one of the keynote speakers. He's done a TED talk. So I enjoy sitting back and just listening to a person that reminds me of myself. And but he's more articulate. I'll just say that is that when I listen to him and how he goes about, doing his work, and I actually have a post that's going to come out right about him, is that when I look at him, he has all these global responsibilities, thousands and thousands of people that work in that organization. He could really focus on compliance. He could focus on process. He could focus on his program, but he always ties it back to a person.
Mhm.
He's a very people-centric, leader. He always ties his success over to the people that work for L'Oreal, and that's exactly the way that that I think as well. Is I'm always very people centric. I'm always going to be focused on leading with people first, and so I guess in many ways I really like him. I asked him to forward the book because we think a lot alike. I often tell him though, but you're more articulate than I am. And he's from he's from the UK, so he honestly always sounds smarter, right, than I do. but he's become a really good, good colleague. I use a bishop to understand, informally moving through an organization. He uses, and his TED Talks was about the hummingbird, persistent, right? Taking little small chunks, delivering value, a little piece at a time. So it just kind of connected like that. And I just really do regard him as a really forward thinking leader in safety and health, as well as environmental programming.
So, what do you think it means to have someone with Malcolm's experience recognize the need for this kind of practical leadership guidance?
Yeah, he did. I sent him my first book, and I actually sent him the manuscript of the second book. And after he read them both, he thought that the second book, especially, was a missing part of what we do as
Hmm.
practitioners. The idea of 5 minute lessons, the idea of carrying a practitioner through different stages of their development, was a necessary part of what our work, should be. But I think more than that is that he recognized that I was doing this and what I would call the safety devotional, right? It's just a 5 minute lesson that I want you to kind of focus on. And I put a try this section. There's a statement or a question for you to answer as a leader, and then there
Hmm.
is a question for you to answer with a frontline team. So we're doing this in very, very succinct, small little nudges of the organization. So that really is how he works. So I think he really liked that approach a lot, and it's just something different, than has been done before.
No, I agree. So earlier we talked about the way you structured the book and the different sections. Um,
hmm
were you intending to make the point that safety cannot change if only one side of the organization is doing the work?
I think that for years, for a long, long time, and you still see this,
Hmm.
is that leaders try to lead from the desk, from a chair. And it's one of the things that really scare me about us with technology influences is that we want to spend so much time on our dashboards that we forget that there are people out on the front line making something or providing a service. I wanted to close that gap, and I'm actually writing a third book to leaders about what their job
Wow.
actually is. It's closing this distance between the office, between the C-suite, or even the EHS
Mhm.
practitioner's office, and those that actually do the work. And if we can do that, then you'll start seeing those partnerships that I talked about in book one. So it's really that. It's that I'm trying to close difference between people that have notoriously, right, been stuck in the offices. And I really don't direct that at EHS professionals because we're more prone to be where the action actually is. But it's all those other leaders that I need to pull them away from their desk or from a meeting room and put them out where the work actually happens. And once we can do that, we can see the value through partnership where you actually have people co-authoring and co-owning the process with you. And for the life of me, I don't know why we as leaders want to do a lot of the work when if we all took a piece of that work, it's a little bit of work for all of us, or it's a lot of work for the few. And if we can do that, we'll have the success that I think that we want to have. I've never had a bad organization. I've had, bad quarters. Certainly, I've had years where I didn't get the success that I wanted. But over this 40-year career that I've had, I can look back and say I've always been quite successful. And I think the tie has been Monica, that I've been very, very good at connecting with the front line and adding value of what they can give back to the organization through partnership.
So
But
is
it
there
takes a little
anything,
practice.
it does, it does. Is there anything that you know now that you wish you had known in the beginning?
In writing the book, no. I think if I look back over my career, 40
Mhm.
years of this, is that you just simply can't fake authenticity. And I think I started this conversation, and I think that is the number one rule that I have when I counsel
Mhm.
young practitioners. They need to be authentic. They need to be looking for relationship building. Employees who've been around, for years can tell within the first minute whether you're there to help them succeed or you're simply there to document some type of deficiency, to record some kind of audit, right, to inspect them. They want to know that you're showing up. And trust isn't built by simply showing up, it's built on how we show up. And that's through really caring about the folks that we are in charge of protecting and building a relationship with them.
Is there something that you're still working on, or you believe that even after all this experience, you're never going to fully perfect it?
Well, I mentioned it. I mean, I'm probably, I don't know, 40, 50% through outlining the next book. I've always said that I would write a trilogy. You know, the first one was at the front
Mhm.
line. The second one was really developed for the middle of an organization. And the third one will be me talking with senior leaders of an organization and what their role really is,
Mhm.
especially for safety and health. It's not the fact that it does not work for anything else. But the way that I write it with a lens towards safety. So everything that I look at is through safety, but it's really about leadership. I've often said that safety is just a template for other things that you can do through a leadership stance that's just different. So it's a boilerplate. Many of the things I write about, you can erase safety, put quality. You can write erase safety and put operations. It still works. But the big thing is that pulling you out of an office, putting you closer to the front line, closing that distance. It's a good thing, and that's what my third book will talk about. It'll be directly at senior leaders who maybe forgot, right, what the most important thing is about their role.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the book, but for those listening in the book, where can they actually find it? How can they get it in their hands?
Well, yeah. So the easiest thing, since most people have it, Amazon carries the book. All you got to do is type in the title or just type in my name, and you'll see both of my books listed there. So you can do that. But Books a Million, they have it. So there's all the bigger establishments that sell books. They do have it available. I do have a website, scottgaddisspeaks.com, and you can find those links on that website. It has my speaking calendar. It also has workbooks, and we didn't talk about that, Monica, but I have individual workbooks. I have team workbooks. If you wanted to spread this out in an organization, they're both there. All that information is on the website.
No, that's fantastic. We definitely should touch on that on a future episode. But I did want to finish with the spirit of the book, not a transformation strategy, not a 5 year roadmap. I want to know, do you have one favorite lesson? And if it's one that you could give to any leader to do tomorrow, what would it be?
Yeah, I talk. I think I just put this on LinkedIn. Go out to the floor with a question: is there one thing that makes your job harder today? And if you could change one thing about your work today, what would it be? Right? And don't frame it. Don't frame it through authority. Don't frame it if you had enough money. Just ask those questions. And that may be my best ones, because I think that you have hundreds of employees in your organizations that are just waiting for that question. What's making this hard for me to do correctly? What's making this hard for me to have success? What is this one thing that if you allow me to change it, I would? And then be
And I'd
surprised by what
imagine,
you hear. Yeah,
yeah, I'd imagine they all have a different answer, every single
they do.
person, because they all handle different things.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely
that's
do.
fantastic. Scott, congratulations again. Writing a book is
Thank
such an
you.
accomplishment, and you did it twice. I mean, after nearly four
Yeah.
decades of experience, you turned it into something that another person can use during a 5 minute conversation before a shift. And that's a contribution to this profession. And what I'm taking away from this conversation is that safety leadership is rarely defined by one major speech, a new initiative, or one perfectly designed program. It's built through hundreds of smaller moments. The question a supervisor chooses to ask, the way a leader reacts when someone raises a concern, the willingness to walk into the floor, understand the work, and treat the people doing it as partners rather than problems to solve. Technology can help us recognize risk sooner. It can connect information, reveal patterns, and then give leaders a clearer view of what's happening. But the algorithm, like you said, cannot walk the floor. It still takes a person to step forward, start that conversation, listen to the answer, like you said, and then do something meaningful with that, with what they've learned. So I wanted to thank you for letting me take over the questions today, letting me interview you. And if you have a chance, please order Scott's book. I think it will change everything.
Gosh, thanks, Monica. Appreciate it.
And thank you to everybody listening. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking better questions, and remember that safer work starts with how we lead.